Hello, I am Eric. I spent 11 years of my life incarcerated. From the time I was 17 to the time I was 28, I was locked up. I make videos talking about my experiences in prison, what it takes to make it once you get out of prison, and really what's wrong with our system. I share experiences. I don't complain about our system too much, but I do like to bring awareness to what goes on in our system. In this video, I am going to talk about some of the problems with our system. I'm going to be kind of blunt. I'm going to be real. So before I get into it, please give me a like. Please subscribe if you're new. That tells YouTube that this is relevant content and it will push it out to more people. There's people out there that are on the wrong path right now. This could deter them. There's people out there that there are people getting out of prison that need to be pointed in the right direction. This will help them as well. Without further ado, let's talk about this. What inspired this video is some guy who was kind of talking trash to me. Said, well, you deserve what you got. Prison was a consequence of your behavior. What do you think you were getting into, Club Med? He was implying in not so many words, or maybe more words, I don't remember, but he was basically saying that our prison system's soft, that we need to lock everybody up, throw away the key, etc. It is a prevalent point of view in our society today. I didn't entertain the guy. I did not debate with him. But let me tell you why that line of thinking fails, and I am going to do so by presenting you with facts, or presenting facts to you, something like that, whatever. Now, right now, I'm not going to provide my sources for all this. I'm going to give you an updated description in the next few days. It's late, I want to go to bed, and I live this stuff, so I have a pretty good idea of what's factual and what's bull. Oni. So, let's get real then. Let's examine some of these ideas. For one, I have never disputed that my actions led me to prison. I don't blame it on anybody. I did what I did. I understand that. I've always owned up. I've always taken responsibility for my actions. I have no problem with that. I don't believe I was the victim. You understand? However, there are things about prison that I was not sentenced to. I'm a big advocate of constitutional rights, not being deprived of life or liberty without due process, having rights. People, in my opinion, should be, well, they should be protected. They should have medical care. They should have health care. They should have psychological issues taken care of. They should be met. Education, I believe, while it might not be a constitutional right, I don't know. I don't know much about the Constitution. I know a few things about it. I know enough to file lawsuits. But I believe people should have the opportunity to pursue an education. I know that's not a right, but it's something that I feel strongly about. But let's get real here. Let's talk facts. Let's talk some statistics. Let's examine if our prison system works. First, let's talk about the population of our prison system. I got papers in front of me. We can go through this stuff. You're in for a ride. You sit down, man. My puppy wants attention. He likes when I get riled up. I'm not really riled up. Just telling y'all how it is. So, in the United States, the land of the free and all that good stuff, we have 5% of the world's population. We have 25% of the world's prison population. We lock up more people than any other country in the world. That's crazy. Now, it costs us doing this mass incarceration. This costs us about $70 billion a year. All right? And a portion, I'm not going to say it's a huge portion, but a portion of the prisons in the United States are private prisons. There are private industries that build prisons and they house inmates. There are companies that are making money off of locking people up. And a lot of you probably say, well, you know what, these are bad people, they need to be separated from the rest of society. They need to be punished. Okay. Well, 95% of people in prison are getting out of prison. They will not remain there. 95%. And there's about 2.3 million people locked up in the United States. 95% are coming back out. You remember that. Now, back to these private prisons. So they get paid to house inmates. All right? And they usually have contracts with the state to maintain a certain occupancy. In other words, the state agrees to keep the prison filled to a certain capacity, usually about 90%. And if they fail to meet that number, if they fail to fill those beds, they have to pay for the empty beds. So, it gives the state incentive to lock more people up. It's kind of weird, but it's there. Kansas is not one of the states that has private prisons. I went to prison in Kansas. I live in Kansas. We didn't have privately owned prisons. Luckily, because those prisons suck. I'll get into that a little bit later. Now, there are also economic impacts of prisons. They're not significant, but they're there. And the impacts that I'm talking about would be private industry. So, a lot of prisons in the United States have companies that come in, big corporations, who will have inmates work for them, make a product for them, provide a service like customer service or something like that. They employ inmate labor. And inmates usually don't make a minimum wage. Private industry in Kansas, there are guys in prison that are making minimum wage. But a lot of states aren't like that. In a lot of states, you might get $1 an hour, if that. Some states, you might get $1 a day, 40 cents per day. So, and some of the companies that do this, Boeing, you might have heard of them. Starbucks, might have heard of them. Victoria's Secret. Yeah. So these companies employ people at a much, much lower rate. We're not talking about outsourcing to China. We're not talking about outsourcing to a third world country. This is in the United States. We are employing people at much lower rates, much lower salaries, much lower wages. So why are they going to pay a free person minimum wage or higher to do a task, a service, make a product, when they can pay an inmate $1 a day or less? Right? Where does that money go? How does that affect the economy, right? Now, let's talk about something else that sucks about the American prison system. Let's talk about segregation. 23-1. A lot of people go to segregation in prison. And I'm talking about long-term segregation. I'm not just talking about you go to the hole for a few days and come back out. I'm talking you spend years of your life in a 6x8 cell or a 12x9 cell, and that's where you are 23 hours a day. For that 1 hour a day that you're not in that cell, you're in a cage, because by federal regulations, you have to be given an hour a day of sunlight. You're still locked up. You're in a cage. They escort you to the cage in handcuffs, but you're in segregation. It has mental and psychological effects on people. It will make you hear things. It will make you see things. It will throw you in states of depression. I was in segregation for almost 2 years, maybe even more. I don't know. I have to add it up. I ended up getting transferred to a mental health section of the prison. I didn't eat for 15 days. A lot of people who were in the same situation killed themselves. I had a guy who lived directly above me slice his own throat. Blood was squirting out of his cell, off the run, leaking off the catwalk. Gallons. Blood just running down the freaking run. Why? Because he'd been in segregation for a long damn time. You know what? He was 19 years old. 19. He had a 3-year sentence. You're never going to hear about it. You're never going to know him. You're never going to know his name. Never going to know what he could have accomplished. Why? Because he sliced his own throat. The officer was coming around. He said, "Hey, officer." Officer turned and looked at him. Dude took a razor blade across his own throat. That sucks. That's the United States prisons. The UN has said that segregation lasting longer than 2 weeks is a form of torture. No other first world country does segregation the way we do it, because they understand that it's detrimental to the mental health of the people in prison. Now, segregation affects roughly 80,000 people in the United States. I'm talking about solitary confinement. I'm talking about being in the hole. 80,000 people are in segregation, estimated, in the United States. And 95% of people in prison are getting out. So you're putting people in segregation, you're doing psychological harm to them, and then you're freeing them into society. Think about that. And I'm going to get more into the mental health aspect of it. 30% of inmates suffer from serious mental illness. That's just one of several numbers I've seen out there. I've seen it a little bit lower. I've seen it a little bit higher. You need to check multiple sources. But around 30% is a pretty solid number. In Kansas, it's probably a little bit higher than that. We have facilities that are devoted just to housing people with mental illnesses. We have Larned Correctional Facility. We have the True Unit in Lansing. It's bad. Matter of fact, in the state of Kansas, the Department of Corrections is the largest mental health provider, even though it's done by private industry. The Department of Corrections in Kansas has privatized their health care system. So you are seen by an independent contractor. However, more people are housed with mental illness in the Department of Corrections in the state of Kansas than anywhere else. So that's pretty rough. Now, another thing that sucks about prison in the United States, let's talk about rape. Let's talk about that one. That's a fun topic, right? Not really. No. It's estimated that about 216,000 men are raped or sexually assaulted each year in the United States. 200 to 216,000. That is the estimated number. However, the number is probably a little bit higher than that because a lot of incidents of sexual violence in prison aren't reported because that makes you a rat. Now, if you think about that, that adds up. If you do some math on that, that equals about 600 people per day or 25 people per hour. There's likely, let's say, if this is a 30-minute video, which is probably going to be around that mark, there's going to be 12 people raped in U.S. prisons. So, Club Med? I don't think so. Cruel and unusual punishment? You bet your ass it is. Literally. If you go to prison and you appear to be weak, timid, naive, you bet your ass it is. You better pucker that thing up because somebody's going to try to take it. That last part might have been a little bit extreme, but whatever. Let's talk about recidivism. So I keep saying that 95% of people that are in prison are getting out. %68 of those people are coming back within 3 years. 68% of people that are getting out of prison will go back to prison or will be rearrested within 3 years. In 9 years, 83% of people who get out of prison will get arrested again. 83%. More than 8 out of 10. That's a lot of people. So clearly, the corrective measure of the corrections system does not work. You see, we lock people up to deter other people from committing crimes. We lock people up to punish them for the crimes that they have committed and to keep them from committing crimes in the future, to separate them from society, to keep society safe. But it doesn't work, not the way we approach it, because they're getting back out of prison. 95% of them will. Even the guys with life sentences, most of them are getting back out of prison. They might have to wait 30, 40, 50 years, but they're getting out of prison. Now, we talk about recidivism, but what else happens when you get out? Well, guys that are getting out of prison, way more likely to be homeless. Way more likely. They're more likely to go back to substance abuse. Newly released inmates have a suicide rate that's 8 times higher than the national average. 8 times. One study that was done showed that guys that were just getting out of prison were killing themselves every 2 days. One inmate, one newly released inmate, killing themselves every 2 days. That's a lot of people dying. It's a lot of people. And who are we letting out of prison? Now this is controversial, even for me. And here's why. So we're letting people out of prison. And I'm not against letting people out of prison. Prisons, they're overcrowded. They don't work. You don't have many programs in there. You don't have the opportunity to get an education in there. At least not funded by the government. If you can pay for it yourself, sure, you can go to school. But most of the time, if you're trying to advance yourself, to better yourself, the state ain't paying for it. But they don't have the programs for guys that are getting out. And the guys that they're letting out, like they let a bunch of people out for this coronavirus thing. They let out non-violent offenders to keep society happy. Well, check this out. Violent offenders, and here's a controversial one, sexual offenders, sex offenders. Those two groups have a lower recidivism rate than the rest of the prison population. Violent offenses are usually a one-time thing. If it's a serious offense, usually someone who has committed a pretty violent crime did so in a moment of passion. They did it in the heat of the moment. It's not usually a pattern. It is not a habitual behavior. Someone who is in prison for drugs, guess what? They probably have a habit. They're probably going back to prison. So that doesn't work. You're giving program credits and making programs, what programs are available, to guys that are going back to prison. Not the guys that are going to stay out or have the greater probability of staying out, the greater potential of staying out. And I'm not saying that violent offenders should be given more breaks, but you're giving breaks to the guys that you know are coming back. It doesn't help the recidivism rate at all. A lot of that, it's a facade. There's an increasing awareness of the problems with our prison system. People are beginning to understand that there's an issue. And so political figures will say, oh, well, I was in favor of the release of X amount of nonviolent offenders. Well, that's great, but they're coming back to prison. Just saying. Doesn't make a lot of sense. But here's the kicker. Here's the big kicker. All right? This is what I'm going to use to cap off this video. There's so many more things that I could say about the prison system and what's wrong with it and how it doesn't work. I think the numbers speak for themselves. People are going back to prison, so they haven't been rehabilitated, they haven't been reformed, they haven't been taken care of. They've been sent to a system that's set up for failure, essentially. I think that kind of speaks for itself. "25% of the world's prison population, about 2.3 million people incarcerated. Here's the kicker. Between, an estimated 2 to 10% of the people incarcerated are innocent, based on data gleaned from exonerations. 2 to 10%, so as many as 230,000 innocent people are in prison in the United States today. That's 230,000 families affected. When a person does time, they don't do it alone. They do and they don't. Most people end up being abandoned once they go to prison. Their family forgets about them. They don't write them. They don't come up and see them. So in that sense, they're alone. But on the family side of it, they're missing an important part of their lives. Mothers are missing their sons. Sisters are missing their brothers. Brothers are missing their sisters. Children are without their fathers. Anywhere between 46,000 of those families and 230,000 of those families are families of innocent men. If I take an innocent person and I lock them in a concrete box, guess what? I have kidnapped them. I have entrapped them. I have taken them captive. That is a crime that is punishable in the United States. But when the government does it, it's okay. Are you beginning to see a problem here? Are you innocent? Have you committed a crime? Well, guess what? It doesn't matter. In the United States, you could still end up doing 5, 10, 15 years in prison, life. You could end up on death row. Many exonerations were people on death row. The Innocence Project has been behind many of the exonerations of inmates who were on death row. They were proven innocent through DNA evidence and other modern technologies. Modern forensic science is freeing people that have been in prison for decades. That's the reality of it. You could be a criminal, you could be innocent, and you could still end up spending your life in prison in the United States. That's not a me problem. I was in prison because of my actions, sure. But if you're watching this and you've committed no crime, you could still end up in prison. Because that is the state of our prison system in the United States. That's real. Let's get real. That's not Club Med. I've seen people get stabbed through the neck. I've seen people get stomped to death. I've been beat up by cops. I've been beat up by inmates. At no point in my sentencing was I sentenced to be beaten. At no point in my sentencing was I sentenced to torture, which is what segregation is, according to the UN. At no point was I sentenced to any of that, but that's what I experienced. So yeah, my actions led me to prison. But my actions didn't create the prison system. You understand? So that's getting real. I hope you enjoyed the video. And if you don't like the video, I don't care. That's where we're at. That's another thing. 95% of people are getting out of prison. If you don't like prisoners, if you think all criminals should be locked up, you think you should lock them up and throw away the key, you think you got a problem with them, 95% of them are getting out. So what are you going to do when you're living right next door to one? Do you want someone who is bitter because they spent so much time in prison and they were mistreated, they were raped, they were spit on, they were beaten on, thrown in segregation, given no programs, no way of bettering themselves? Or do you want someone living next to you who has been reformed and who is in a sound state of mind and who is trying to better themselves each and every day? What would you rather have living next door to you and your family? Think about that. I'm Eric. This has been another episode of From Prison to the Streets. I'm out of here. Right, they say.